I call it infinite intelligence because I have students of all faiths and all religions all over the world as my students. And the infinite intelligence happens to be a sort of a neutral in-between term that nobody can object to. Nobody at all. But unless you not only believe in that, unless you can prove to yourself, unless you can absolutely put down on paper evidence that there is a first cause that you can draw on, why then you are not going to be able to make the fullest use of applied faith. One of my students asked me one day about my concept of God, about my concept of infinite intelligence, and if I meant the same thing as God. I said, why, yes, I do. Well, he said, can you prove the existence of your concept of God? I said, why, everything in the universe is the finest of evidence of the existence of it, because of the orderliness of the universe. Everything's orderly, from the electrons and protons of the smallest part of matter on up to the largest suns that float through the heavens. Everything's in orderliness. No chaos, no running together of the planets. Why, there's more evidence of a first cause than there is of anything that I know of. And if you don't believe that, if you don't accept it, if you don't see it, if you don't feel it, if you don't know that, then you won't know that you are a minute part of that infinite intelligence expressing through your brain. And if you once recognize that, then you recognize the truth of what I said, that your only limitations are those which you set up in your own mind or permit somebody to set up there or circumstances to establish for you. Next, careful inventory of your past defeats and adversities from which it becomes obvious that all such experiences do carry the seed of an equivalent benefit. Now, just to hear me say that every adversity carries with it the seed of an equivalent benefit, that every defeat, every failure carries with it the seed of an equivalent benefit, wouldn't mean a thing in the world to you, unless I made application of it and gave you illustration after illustration, unless you examined enough illustrations in your own experience to see that it always works out that way. That's why I want you to examine these adversities that come to you. Do you know that oftentimes your adversities are your greatest blessings? Do you have any idea the greatest blessing that ever came into my life? Those of you who know considerable about me, would you have any idea what it is? Of course, it was the loss of my mother. And ordinarily you would say that would be the greatest catastrophe that could overtake a child, would be to lose his mother at the age of 9 years. Why do I say that was the greatest blessing? Because it brought me a new mother to take her place that's been responsible for everything that I've achieved, everything that I shall achieve. Very largely responsible, at least. And without her influence, I'd still be up there fighting rattlesnakes, drinking mountain liquor, and fighting feuds. Where my relatives still are doing that same thing. No reason to expect that I wouldn't be. I've had a lot of other adversities. And I want to tell you that without some 20 major adversities I've gone through with, I would never have been able to approve the soundness of this philosophy, and that there is the seed of an equivalent benefit in every adversity. Can you imagine any worse adversity coming to a man than to walk down to the hospital and to be informed that his son was born without any sign of ears, and that he would be a deaf and dumb mute all of his life? Can you imagine any worse adversity than that? I will always be thankful that that happened, because by my contact with infinite intelligence, he was improvised with a hearing system of some sort that gave him 65% of his normal hearing, and with a hearing aid, 100%. He's learned to live a normal life, and I got the greatest demonstration of my entire experience of the power of faith. I couldn't have gotten it any other way. I couldn't have gotten it secondhand. I had to get it firsthand. I never accepted that affliction of that child, not even before I saw him, not even after I saw him. I never accepted it. His relatives accepted it. They wanted to put him in the school of underprivileged, where he learned the sign language, learned lip reading. I didn't want him to know there were such things. And when he got up to where he was old enough to go to school, I had to fight with the school authorities every year, just as regular as the time came around. They wanted to send him over to school for underprivileged children, where he'd mix with the other children and see that there were afflictions. I didn't want him to know there were such things. And I taught him from the very beginning that his not having any ears was a great blessing. And he believed it. And it turned out to be, because people took compassion on him. They did things for him they wouldn't have done otherwise. He got a job as a salesman for the Saturday Evening Post, and he led every salesman throughout the United States. Oftentimes he'd go out with $5 worth of merchandise and come back with $10 in cash. He did that many times. People would look at him and say, well, that poor little fellow, no ears, out selling papers. I guess his parents are poor. Give him a dollar bill, and instead of giving him back 95 cents, they'd say, oh, just Sonny, you just keep that. And very often he'd get $1 apiece for Saturday Evening Post. Not at all conscious today of any affliction. He's living a perfectly normal life because I taught him that an affliction, any kind of an affliction, can be transmuted into a benefit. Now that's an astounding thing, isn't it, to consider that that is true. But it is true. Now, as I said, you're just hearing me say that won't mean a thing in the world unless you begin to look around in your own experiences, take inventory, and watch what happens in the future. There'll be things happen to you in the future that are unpleasant, and maybe some to me too. But I tell you what I'm going to do when anything unpleasant happens to me. I'm going to immediately transmute it into something pleasant. Immediately. And then I'm still talking about the fundamentals of faith. Self-respect expressed through harmony with one's own conscience is certainly an important factor in applied faith. Self-respect expressed through harmony with one's own conscience. Isn't it a marvelous thing that the Creator set up in everybody a judge advocate that tells you the right thing and the wrong thing? You don't have to ask anybody. Isn't that a marvelous thing? You don't have to ask anybody what's right or wrong. Your own conscience tells you. Unless you convert it into a conspirator instead of a cooperator by choking it off and not responding to it, as so many people do. Your conscience can be not only a guide, but it can also be corrupted to where it's a conspirator. It'll help you cover up your meanness. And a lot of people use it for just that purpose, too. Believe me, they have it choked off. If that weren't true, there couldn't be so many brutes loose in the world today, concocting plans for starting bigger and better wars. They have no conscience. They've killed off the conscience. That conscience is a marvelous thing. And next, to create a mental attitude favorable for the expression of faith. Now, here's what you do. First of all, know what you want and determine what you have to give in return for it. Know what you want in life. And I mean not only in your major purpose, but in your minor purposes. What kind of a house you want to live in? What kind of a car you want to drive? What kind of a wardrobe you want? What kind of an education you want your children to have? What kind of a present you're going to buy your wife for a birthday? And you better be sure to buy her one every time if you're going to keep on good terms with her. What kind of a cake are you going to bake for your husband on his birthday? And you better make it a good one. Did you know, ladies and gentlemen, married ladies and gentlemen in particular, did you know it's not the big things in the relationship between a man and his wife that counts? It's the little niceties, the little things that count. Well, it's the little niceties, the little things that my wife cooks up for me. Now, I don't mean in food, but the little parties, the little visits, the trips that she cooks up for me when I'm home. They don't amount to so much in one way, and yet another way they're very sentimental, and keeps that relationship alive that we had before we were married. We're still courting each other. I think I do more of a courting job now than I did before, because after all, I not only got her, I have to keep her. That's important. Don't we have a lot of fun with these off-the-cuff remarks? Not that you don't find any of that in the notes at all.